The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
If the rumors are true, we know this to be a fact. The Canucks don't want too many Czech players on their team. More on that next year on Locked On Canucks.
Your Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
A happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks and also a Canucks writer since 2013, currently with Daily Hive Vancouver. Before we dive into today's episode, we got to thank you for tuning into Locked On Canucks because guess what? Even during the offseason, it is your Canucks every damn day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. They got hundreds of shows, baby. And hey, for our show, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go like, follow, subscribe, maybe even leave a review. Do it all out of the good of your heart on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I also got to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, I said co-host of Locked On Canucks. You might see if you're here on YouTube. You're not going to hear his voice that all through this episode. Kyle Bowen, absent on today's show. And, I got to make it up to Kyle because, I was for everydayers or occasional listeners, you might have known I was on a road trip, traveling around. I missed a couple of shows. I recorded on some bathroom floors, but Kyle handled the load while I was gone. So it's only fair that I handled the load today. And I know Kyle's at a wedding over the weekend. Maybe he's still hungover, but I think the real reason he can't join is that he's just sick of hockey. Kyle's one of those fans, and maybe you're the same way, that once the Canucks lose, he wants nothing to do with the sport. Okay, nothing. I don't think Kyle's watched a second of the conference finals so far because when your team loses, it hurts. It hurts, and Kyle's an emotional fan. He takes it to heart. But you hear that emotion here on Locked On Canucks, and Kyle, I'm sure he'll be back another day. Hopefully, maybe. Because I don't know if I can handle this show by myself. As much as I love the people and I do it for you, the show is better when Kyle Bowen is here. Will the Canucks be better if they trade Martin Necas, acquire Martin Necas and trade Filip Hronek? That's what I want to talk about today on Locked On Canucks because it's in the rumor mill, okay? Silly season, okay? We're not quite there yet. Playoffs are still going on. But the rumors are picking up for 28 teams that are out of the dance right now. And one of the rumors is, and Elliot Friedman dropped this late last week, that the Canucks might be interested in acquiring Martin Necas. And I made the joke off the top, you can't have too many Czech players on this team. That's no offense to the Czechs. They're obviously one of the best hockey factories in the world. Shout out Jaromir Jagr. Shout out Jan Hlavik, former Canuck. But the rumor here is the Canucks could potentially trade Czech defenseman Filip Hronek for Czech center, now turned winger, Martin Necas. Okay? So let's talk about it, and I'll talk about Martin Necas first and foremost, and then I'll get into Hronek a bit later on. And I'll end the show with a little Beggsy's ballad. I want to be a butthurt Canucks fan for a little bit, but we'll save that to the end of the show. Martin Necas, okay, so he's got some ties to the Vancouver Canucks on a couple of different levels. Now, first and foremost, he was a part of the 2017 draft, okay, the same draft where Elias Pettersson became a Vancouver Canuck. Martin Necas was picked spots later at 12th overall. It's been a bit of an up and down tenure in Carolina for the most part. But at the end of the day, the guy is still top 10 in scoring among players from that draft class. He's 8th overall in scoring with 243 points, 3 goals shy of 100 career goals. So he's been a productive NHL player, despite, again, an up and down tenure in Carolina. Now, here's a reminder, for as much heat as Elias Pettersson's got in this market, again, he's making the big boy bucks now. He is first among players in that 2017 draft class, 412 points and 407 career games. The next best player is Nico Hischier, who has 353 career points in 452 career games. So Elias Pettersson and Cale Makar, obviously in that draft class too, arguably the two best players from that draft class. But Martin Necas is right up there, okay? This guy's a good hockey player. Now, the interesting thing about him being in Carolina is that he's not necessarily the best fit for Coach Rod Brind'Amour. So I got a source out east, not to toot my own horn. I don't know too many people, but I got a source out east, and he's, it's been rumored about that Martin Necas and Rod Brind'Amour apparently don't get along. You've heard Martin Necas' dad come out and kind of hint that maybe Necas would be better served playing in a different market. Could that market be the Vancouver Canucks? Maybe. We talk about Elias Pettersson, right? The best player of that draft class, maybe aside from Cale Makar. He needs another winger, right? That's really, we heard at the end of season presser, that's really priority number one for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, the problem with Martin Necas is much like Filip Hronek, the guy who, he's rumored to be traded for. And I'll say this initially, the deal does make some sense, but there's a danger in it, an inherent danger. And let's get to it first and foremost. One of it is the contract. I'm looking at AFP analytics and contract projections. Both Martin Necas and Filip Hronek, they're projected to have very similar contracts. Martin Necas, I have in front of me right now. According to AFP analytics, if he signs a long-term deal, 7 years, he's projected to get paid a shade under $7.5 million per season. On a short-term deal, that number is 6.2 million per season on a 3-year deal. Filip Hronek's numbers are eerily similar. I'll try to pull it up quick for you here, but on a short-term deal, Filip Hronek, 3 years at $6.1 million, and almost the exact same 7 years, the projection is a shade under $7.5 million if he signs a long-term deal. So more or less, you're going to pay these players the same money. Now, my question to Canucks Nation, the question I want to talk about is, would you rather pay Filip Hronek, who, despite his flaws in the second half, despite his flaws in the playoffs, is a borderline number one right shot defenseman, right? I think you saw it throughout the season. Kyle and I joked about it on this show. Filip Hronek in the first half of the season looked like he might be the second best defenseman in Canucks history. And although his offense tailed in the second half, I actually thought defensively, he won a lot of battles. He was still a good defensive player. Now, is that a player you want to pay $7 million to? A guy who had 12 points over his final 40 games in the regular season? I don't know. But again, for similar dollars, would you rather pay the guy who's a low-end number one right shot defenseman or the guy who's a top six winger? Now, Martin Necas in Carolina, the numbers don't necessarily jump off the page, but he had another good season, 24 goals, 53 points in 77 games. Second highest points per game total of his career. Not as good as he was last season, though, when he had 28 goals and 71 points in 82 games. So a bit of a step back for Necas this season. And again, you look at the Carolina Hurricanes, and they got a roster, and they got a team who's full of good two-way defensive players. Martin Necas isn't necessarily that guy. And I think that's a big reason why in Carolina they've moved him from center to wing. There's not that same trust as him at center ice in terms of being able to be a good two-way player. Now, again, the Canucks have a good defensive team, depending on what happens this offseason, right? But I think you trust Tocchet, you trust Foote, you trust Gonchar, you trust the structure in place. But what they desperately need is another top six winger. Now, you fill that void with Martin Necas, you send Filip Hronek out the door. You can look at it this way, too. If you sign Martin Necas, and let's say it's somewhere in that, 4 or 5 years at $7 million a season, you do that instead of signing a Jake Guentzel, who, again, I think would be a great fit for the Vancouver Canucks. We'll talk about it throughout the offseason as we get there. But Jake Guentzel at $9-ish million versus Necas at $7-ish million, it might open up some things for you to do on defense, especially if you're not, signing Hronek and paying him the big boy bucks. But that being said, $7 million for a guy who had just over 50 points this year, who's had some ups and downs. Look, he's got a lot of skill. He's raising his stock right now at the World Hockey Championships, if you want to consider that, right? I think he had 1 goal and 3 assists and helping the Czechs get to the gold medal game there. This is a talented player. This is a player with speed. You could argue the Canucks need more speed. He's not small. He's 6'2", 190 pounds. But he's a bit of a flawed player, right? And every player in the NHL has got their flaws. But Martin Necas, his defensive awareness isn't great. And that's a bit troubling considering that he plays on the Carolina Hurricanes team that's got one of the best defensive coaches in the game right now. So there's a fear here. Look, Pettersson needs an upgrade at wing. Martin Necas, you could see that being a great fit. Necas' speed, he's got a good nose for the net as well. but can you deal with the defensive deficiencies in this game? And do you want to pay him that money? Again, this isn't a guy on some sweetheart deal. This is a guy that's going to command a big raise for your Vancouver Canucks. On the other side, I do want to get into Filip Hronek and his season a little bit more and really come to a conclusion. Doesn't make sense to trade Necas for Filip Hronek. Let's break down some of the numbers on the other side. Before we do that, let's shout out our friends over at FanDuel. All right, it's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. And if you're making some bets, make sure you go do it on FanDuel because they are giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Now, the Stanley Cup odds, they changed over the weekend, okay? I think what we talked about it at the end of the week last week, it was Florida with the best odds of winning the Cup, then Edmonton, then Dallas, then New York. Now, of course, the Rangers have won 2 games since then, 2 overtime games, but they won 2 games since then. The Dallas Stars, they beat Edmonton in game 2. They tie that series up at 1. So the odds right now on FanDuel, Dallas and Edmonton both tied with the best odds of winning the Stanley Cup at plus 250. Oh, sorry, the Rangers also have plus 250. So we have a 3-way tie for who's going to win the Stanley Cup right now, according to the odds at FanDuel. I mean, of those 3, I still lean Dallas. I think Dallas is on paper the best team, but man, oh man, you could say that Edmonton has outplayed them in the first 2 games. And I'll get more into that in Beggsy's ballad later on in the show. The Florida Panthers now trailing their series, unsurprisingly, the lowest odds winning the Cup right now at plus 360. So if you're on the Panthers bandwagon, and you know, I've said on the show, F Florida, I don't want that team to win a Cup before the Canucks. But if you're on that bandwagon, those odds, they aren't too bad, okay? They aren't bad. So whatever you're betting on, make sure you bet on FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook.
Man, we're going to have a lot of fun tonight in Vancouver, all my real fans.
All right. You're back here on Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs. Again, lacking my brother, my twin, Kyle Bowen today. I heard he had some Bacardi at the wedding, and he's feeling the effects, man. This guy, he keeps seeing 31 and a half years old for some reason. Like he's just automatically 31 and a half the day after he turns 31. And, you know, when you turn 31, man, that Bacardi, you can't drink that, Kyle, man. Quit drinking chocolate Bacardi, buddy. Unbelievable, okay? Now, another guy who, maybe needs to lay off the sauce, Filip Hronek. Was he saucing up in the second half of the season? No, I can't spread rumors like that, man. But Filip Hronek was clearly a different player in the second half of the season, right? And you look at the playoffs, and I was kind of looking at the numbers in the regular season versus the playoffs for Hronek versus Necas. And I like to use our friends over at Hockey Stat Cards. So according to Hockey Stat Cards, they give a game score to every player. Filip Hronek was a much better player. He was, 6th or 7th best player on the Canucks during the regular season. Martin Necas was 6th or 7th worst on their Hurricanes, which says something, man. Because Necas, again, he was tied for 3rd on the team in points, but he gets dinged because, again, he's not a great defensive player. And those are playing into his metrics. Okay? Filip Hronek, again, had an unreal first half of the season. I mean, we talked about it midway through the year. The guy was the leader in terms of primary assists at 5-on-5. And sure, there was some puck luck that went his way. But you can see that Filip Hronek, when he gets the puck in his own end, is pretty good at breaking it out and sending it up the ice. He's pretty good at winning board battles. What lacked for me in the second half for Filip Hronek was I feel like he kind of lost his mojo offensively. He was firing pucks at the net willy-nilly, not really playmaking anymore, and it just wasn't working out for him. So I think the real, true Filip Hronek, we haven't seen him yet because we saw 2 players, one who just put up these unreal offensive numbers and another player who was kind of ghastly offensively. And this is a big reason why I preached for it midway through the season. I did not get my way. I wanted to see Filip Hronek play away from Quinn Hughes for an extended period of time. I felt like when you got to that point midway through the season, Hughes is having this unreal year. Hughes was propping up Hronek to an extent. Hronek was helping out Hughes, but Hughes was propping up Hronek as well. And now you're at a point where, Hronek is logging these huge minutes beside Quinn Hughes. He's got a great arbitration case. And I don't think the Canucks want to pay him over $7 million. And I don't blame them. I don't blame him. Okay. But when I look at Filip Hronek versus Martin Necas, again, you got two flawed players here who are going to command a lot of money. In my opinion, I would rather pay the defenseman over the winger. That's what it comes down to for me, because I do think they're similar players at the end of the day. I talked about Necas having the better, Hronek having the better regular season than Necas. But in the playoffs, Necas was better than Filip Hronek. Necas had 9 points in 11 games. Was one of Carolina's best forwards during the postseason. So he brought it. He brought it in the postseason, but it still wasn't enough for Carolina, especially when they went down 3-0 in that series. Still, I think if you're going to consider this trade Necas for Hronek, if it's going to work, I think Carolina's got to give up more than just Necas. It can't be really a one-for-one trade in my eyes. Because, again, I think you have two comparable players, but you have one who's a winger and one who's a right shot defenseman. And we've talked about this market for years, how hard it is to acquire right shot defensemen. And I got to say, just for a minute here, I do find it a little strange, okay? And I know Hronek had a bad second half, but how long have we talked about in this market the need to acquire a good right shot defenseman? And now all of a sudden we have a good right shot defenseman, and it seems like most people in this market want to get rid of him. Look, I know he had a bad second half of this season. I know he got a little testy during the postseason press conference, despite not talking to the media all year long. But yeah, this is one of the best right shot defensemen we've seen in this market for a long, long time. You can't overpay him. That would be a mistake. But again, one of the best right shot defensemen we've seen in Vancouver for a long, long time. We'll talk more about Filip Hronek throughout the offseason, but I think the best case scenario for the Canucks is sign him to a short-term deal, pay him something in the low sixes if you can. If he'll take it, that would be a pretty big discount compared to what he wants, according to his agent. If it does get to a point where Hronek doesn't want to budge and his agent doesn't want to budge, to me, then this trade makes more sense. But if we're just purely talking about Hronek for Necas here, I'd be a little bit worried about that as a Canucks fan. Now, that being said, obviously, it's not all in a nutshell. Who do you replace Filip Hronek with? I mean, Chris Tanev is a right shot D who's hitting the UFA market. Brett Pesce, former Hurricane, another right shot D hitting the UFA market. Jalen Chatfield in Carolina, former Canuck Jalen Chatfield. I don't know if you want that guy playing in a top 4 role, but he's been pretty good for Carolina since he joined a couple of seasons ago. So there are paths for the Canucks to, fill out their defense. But again, I think we're discounting, the season that Filip Hronek had for your Vancouver Canucks. Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, whether you're live on YouTube with us, whether you're watching and listening after the fact, it don't matter, okay? It don't matter. Tell us how you feel, okay? You can also hit us up in the Discord as well. Lots going on in the Discord. Canuck fans talking on the toilet. There's nothing more beautiful than Canuck fans talking on the toilet. We'll get to some comments on the other side. And I got to touch on one other thing. I had a Beggsy's ballad lined up about being a butthurt Canucks fan. It might be Beggsy's ballad times too, because I got to talk a bit about Frank Saravalli, okay? Frank Saravalli, after spending, about 2 weeks in Vancouver, thinks he knows the city, man. Unbelievable, man. He's giving me gray hairs. Stop giving me your gray hairs, Frank. Unbelievable stuff. Let's get to that on the other side. No ad read here, so I'm just going to pause, pick my nose, and we'll be back on the other side here on Locked On Canucks.
Man, we're going to have a lot of fun tonight in Vancouver, all my real fans.
All right. You're back here on Locked On Canucks. Your Canucks every day. My name is Trevor Beggs, usually joined by Kyle Bowen. Often it's just Kyle Bowen riding solo, but today you got me instead. Sucker. All right, so a couple of things I want to touch on in Beggsy's ballad. Let's start first by talking a bit about Frank Saravalli and his comments about Vancouver. Unbelievable, Frank. What the... Nothing pisses me off more than a guy talking trash about a city that he has no idea about, okay? So if you didn't hear the clip, Frank Saravalli, a couple days ago, ripped into Vancouver Canucks fans. He talked about being in the city for a couple weeks here, and he was out here during the second round. And how, in Vancouver, there's a lot of like rich, snobby people. I think was the point he's trying to make. Honestly, I was kind of seeing red watching that video, so maybe I missed a couple aspects of it. But he basically talked about how in Vancouver, they don't deserve a cup as much as Edmonton. Because in Vancouver, you have these rich, snobby people, whereas in Edmonton, they're the working man, okay? They're the working man. And to Frank, all I got to say to that is, shut the fuck up. Unbelievable, man. Frank Saravalli thinks he knows the city. Where the hell are you from, Frank? Are you from Philadelphia? Aren't you not even a Canadian? The Vancouver Canucks, and I might be biased, I don't care. The Vancouver Canucks deserve a Stanley Cup more than pretty much every other franchise out there. And I know, Oilers fans, they haven't won in a long time, blah, blah, blah. They're a good fan base. They got some fans. But that's a city that's seen greatness before. The Vancouver Canucks have one of the most rabid fan bases in the league, and they've never witnessed greatness lift the Stanley Cup. I see it on our show. I see it in our comments. There isn't a bunch of amazing fans in this market, okay? There's some bad fans too, but there's also some bad fans in Edmonton. But just to say Vancouver's a bunch of rich, classless fans and Edmonton deserves a cup because they're a bunch of hardworking people, I think Frank Saravalli needs to wake up, lay up the donuts, man. The sugar's getting to your head. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. This guy's supposed to be a professional? Man, send this guy over to Eklund. Hockey Buzz. Unbelievable stuff. All right, I'm gonna hit the Beggsy's ballad button one more time because there's another thing I wanted to talk about here. And it's in regards to the Western Conference Final that'd be nice, when the Edmonton Oilers and the Dallas Stars. And we'll wrap up by getting to a few comments here on Locked On Canucks. All right, so I've been watching the Western Conference Finals, okay? And I really thought that the Dallas Stars would just hand it to the Edmonton Oilers. And through 2 games of the series, I'm pissed off. Because I think as a Canucks fan, I would have felt better if Dallas just went in there and pounded Edmonton. Because it makes me feel that, the Canucks wouldn't have stood a chance anyways, okay? Dallas would have whooped us. And I did feel that way after we lost Game 7. But what I've seen through 2 games so far is that, this Canucks team, they would have had a good goddamn chance against the Dallas Stars. Look, Stuart Skinner's been better for the Edmonton Oilers, but the Edmonton Oilers defense, ever since they split up that CC and Nurse pairing, has been better as well. And they were better against the Vancouver Canucks after they split up that pairing. But the Edmonton Oilers have been the better team through 2 games so far. And I hate saying it. Frank Saravalli's probably fapping in a bathroom after these first 2 games here. But the Vancouver Canucks would have stood a good chance of beating the Dallas Stars, especially because we now know that Thatcher Demko is probably going to return for the conference finals. And as good as Shilovs was, again, he's not going to be the runner-up for the Vezina this year, right? That's Thatcher Demko. And Thatcher Demko's numbers against Dallas are unreal. I think he's 7-0-1. He's never lost in regulation to the Dallas Stars. Like the Vancouver Canucks, they have a good defense, much like the Oilers. I think the problem, the struggles to create offense still would have been there. But you could probably mask that more if you have a guy like Thatcher Demko in net. So, man, Kyle, I don't blame you from taking a break from hockey, man, because I watch these Western Conference Finals and it's pissing me off. It's pissing me off because I know the Canucks, maybe this wasn't their season, right? Obviously, it wasn't their season. They've lost now. But if they found a way to win Game 7, I think they would have had a chance to beat the Stars and advance to the Stanley Cup Finals. And now Stars in 5, there's still a chance of that. But, man, oh, man, if you're an Oilers fan, it's hard not to feel good about the way things have gone so far in that series. Tied 1-1, a couple close games going back to Rogers Arena. That's just the way it is. All right, let's get to a few comments here. I'm going to shout out the great Aaron Gray. Edmonton's the armpit of Canada. Ask Big Z. We haven't talked about Zadorov today, and there's time to talk about him during this offseason, but the Canucks got to find a way to resign this guy, right? And you saw the leaked offseason script episode. You could choose to believe it or not. I found it in my Gmail, but the Canucks ended up resigning Zadorov with that leaked offseason script. Again, if you missed that episode, go check it out from Friday. The Canucks re-signed Zadorov to a 5-year deal at shade under $5 million per season. Look, if the Canucks are going to keep most of the players that they want to keep, guys are going to have to take discounts. Okay? And Nikita Zadorov is going to have to do the same if he wants to stay in Vancouver. We'll see it, okay? I see Kyle in the comments here. He says, what would you have to package with Nils Höglander to get Martin Necas? Now, this is an interesting question because, again, Höglander has the benefit of having the much better contract, right? Like, I think you'd rather Höglander on your team than Necas. So I have a hard time seeing a scenario where the Canucks would package anything to trade Höglander for Martin Necas. You kind of have two similar players in a way. I know Höglander is definitely more of a feisty player than Necas. And Necas is more of a skill guy. Höglander's got the skill, the feistiness. He'll get just as many goals as Necas this season as well. I just don't see the Canucks doing that trade at all. Now, again, if the Canucks are going to trade for Necas, it's probably going to be Filip Hronek. Plus, maybe Carolina's got to include a prospect or a draft pick out of it. That's my thought, okay? That's my thought. Again, Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. I'm wrapping it up here, okay? I'm wrapping it up. Gotta go. Kyle will be back tomorrow. Again, let me know in the comments. Necas for Hronek, what do you think that looks like? Is it possible? Are you a fan of the deal? Of the potential deal? It's silly season. It's coming upon us. More rumors, more trade talk, more speculation here on Locked On Canucks because, hey, we want this team to be better, okay? That's why we got to talk about these potential deals. We want this team to be better. And hopefully you join us for the ride here on Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. Shout out to the everydayers, occasional listeners, first-time listeners, new subscribers, and those of you who join us on the live show on YouTube. Hey, I don't care where you're listening. When you're listening, it just means a lot to us that you tune in to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. We're trying to be morning people here. Some shows might be around noon, but we're trying to be morning people for the most part. Shows going live on YouTube around, between 8:30, 8:45 a.m., something in that ballpark. And hopefully I have my brother Kyle back from his Bacardi hangover next time here on Locked On Canucks. And hopefully the Canucks haven't done a 1-for-1 trade Necas for Hronek by then. But we'll see. We'll see, baby. Again, you've been listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every day. I'm Trevor Beggs, signing out. F you, Frank Silver Valley.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.